This is America Offline with David Klein. Real conversations, authentic connections with digital wellness experts and mental game gurus. No texting, emailing, snapping, we ain't even tweeting. We're hopping online to talk mental health, mindfulness, and how good it feels to be offline. Coaching you up and how to take control of tech so tech doesn't take control of you.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the America Offline podcast. We are here today with Dr. Goali. Dr. Goali, how are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. So why don't you just jump in and tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, and how you got to be doing the work you're doing today?
Absolutely. So I am a licensed clinical psychologist. I am in private practice, so I see patients kind of all over, run the gamut. I will say I started heavily doing a lot of counseling center work. So that was part of my training, my internship, my fellowship. I was in the Bay Area a lot. And, love that age group. And it's kind of, the joke in therapy is, they always say, can you see a little younger and a little younger? And so you start moving to, high school and then, middle school. And, one of the things that came up that, I really love, especially with that younger age group, is you start working with parents and you start learning what are the issues, right? And what are the things that are kind of coming up? And, as it really kind of pertains to your podcast and the work that you do, it was our pesky phones, right? So phones were the thing that I kept hearing about over and over again. Parents would be like, this is the devil, right? And
right.
Kids throwing temper tantrums when phones were taken away, but at the same time, a lot of cyberbullying happening. I learned so much from my clients. I always say I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if it weren't for them. And it was really seeing that there was a need and that what I needed didn't exist, right? And so having to really kind of create the resources, right? So as a therapist, a lot of times somebody will come in and they're depressed or they're anxious and you're like, great, here's my anxiety workbook, right? Here's my depression workbook. But social media and devices is so new and we really kind of haven't caught up to it. And I think, you and I would probably say we did not have phones when we were middle schoolers, right? So I'll be the first to say college was my first cell phone. And so I feel grateful, like Facebook wasn't until college for me either. I'd say I'm probably more of a Zuckerberg contemporary, right? And so this whole idea of, there's a whole world that kids today starting at 9, 10, depending on really when they get their first cell phone, are exposed to. And it's this bombardment all day long. And, it becomes so tricky because at the same time, if you don't have the device, you're out. You're socially ostracized. So you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. And it makes it a really challenging, arena to navigate. And so in my therapy practice, that's what I saw, parents and teens really at odds of what do we do with our devices?
Totally. So, oh God, it's like, where do you start? If someone's coming to you, Dr. Goali, and I guess it's always different, right? All kids are totally different. There's different keys to unlock every kid. Like, what's your process for starting to peel back the onion on what kids need or what the family needs to help their child?
Absolutely. Well, I think absolutely you have that kind of general assessment level, right? Of sort of what's going on, what are the triggers, all those different elements. And again, part of it is, of course, every year school gets more competitive. There's more busy work. There's more peer pressure. So there's a lot of layers. Like you said, it's that onion that you keep peeling back. And I would say, again, because you don't want to overstate it and say, it's all social media, it's all our phones, but that is intertwined in the fabric of all of it. And that's kind of the thing that exacerbates the current concern, right? So it's one thing to be a kid and I've got my geometry that I've got to do and I'm on the baseball team and I have all these other things. But now there's this whole social world that's going on 24/7, right? And you're very well aware of this, of, people at 2 a.m. text messaging and sleeping next to their phones. And so, what's happening a lot of times, I sort of start with the basics of like, are you eating? Are you sleeping? Are you taking care of yourself? Are you exercising? And a lot of times, again, for me, what I have found is I have to ask about device usage because that is oftentimes the thing that's keeping them from sleep, right? Oh, I meant to go to the gym. I wound up watching a Netflix show. right? When they want to unwind, instead of let me go get fresh air, it's let me, go on my social media feed instead. And so it's really kind of pinpointing, again, and everyone, like you said, is going to be different on the continuum. I'm always in awe when someone's like, oh, I don't really do social media. I'm like, you don't? That's amazing,
Mm-hmm.
But that's, the exception typically. And so it's really kind of, again, seeing somebody's worldview. I would say, from my experience, there is a slight gender difference as well, right? And I think that that's something that existed pre-technology, right? Of the way they talk about, interpersonal aggression between girls and boys. So I think, whereas with boys back in the day, it's like you're beating each other up on the playground and you have the external aggression and it's gone. With girls, it's always been this sort of passive aggressive and you're gossiping and you're nice, but then you're backstabbing and it's a little bit more complicated.
Right.
So take that and move it to social media, right? And so it becomes, again, even more of this insidious factor. A lot of it, especially when I work with teens individually or, millennials, adults, whatever group it is that's sort of struggling with, is really also getting the truth of the matter. So, there's the whole Finsta, right? The secondary Instagram. So there's
the Finstagrams,
the Instagram, exactly. So you got to be honest with yourself, and obviously you've got to be honest with your therapist to be able to help the person, right? Because especially today's youth, they're very, very savvy, above and beyond their parents. And so it's like, how are you 2 steps ahead to know if they say, hey, look, mom, my Instagram is innocent and there's nothing going on, but there's this whole, double life basically that they're living. It's important to be aware of that. And so I will say, especially therapy with families, it's being very careful, obviously, confidentiality, boundaries. So you want that trust where, a teen will tell you and kind of say, hey, here's what's going on, without obviously ratting them out to their parents, but having that conversation of, hey, what do we do about technology? What do we do about bedtimes, having it outside of the room when people are sleeping? Just, there's a host of things. Like you said, there's so much that can be said in this domain. But really kind of getting down to the heart of the matter for each person, which can look very different.
Yeah. And so when you get to the heart of the matter, I'm curious because I work with a lot of kids and teens myself. And one of the hardest things for me is they get it, right? They're really smart and they understand that it's not necessarily good for them. Obviously it's a necessary thing. Like they're going to be growing up in a world of technology. Like they got to learn it. They need to learn to self-moderate.
Yeah.
But how do you really inspire them to truly want to make change without just being like, oh, you're all messed up, you want your life to be better? Like, what's your trick to really inspire them? I find that is oftentimes very difficult.
So I think that part of it is, in therapy, we talk about black and white thinking. So like when we talk about the idea of, cognitive thought distortions, right? So we can be very much caught up in this idea of all or nothing, good or bad, right? And so I always tell people, the phone can be your friend. The phone can be fantastic, right? So I'll do meditation in session using an app with my clients, right? So the first thing is I kind of get on the same level of, I'm not saying get rid of this device and that's going to solve all your problems.
Right.
It's how do we kind of not let it control us, but we control it. And so from there, a lot of times, so when I talk about detoxing to people, it's like shedding the layers, right? So if you want to go on Instagram, but you don't really use Snapchat, get rid of your Snapchat app. You don't need it on your phone, right? Like, let's clean up the dock. Or if you use Facebook too much, delete the app and use it only on your computer, right? So it's like the micro changes that we do and allowing for that space. So like, I'm a big fan of the digital detox weekends. So it's like, you're gone camping, you're gone on vacation, you don't have reception, you survive, right? It's 24 hours, 48 hours. But what I hear actually a lot is relief. Like when they're finally off and they're free, they're like, thank God, that was nice, And sometimes it's because they were grounded and they didn't have a choice. But when they are being truly honest with me, they will actually admit, like, it wasn't as bad as I thought, right? It was nice to have an excuse to not be getting back to my friends.
Yeah. So I do, that's my core business is we do offline weekend experiences for kids. And even if we are unsuccessful with giving them any tech life balance tips and tricks or anything like that, 100% of the time, I always tell my wife, like, if I'm there, kids are having fun. 100% of the time, the kids will walk away and they'll be like, wow, I never knew I could have that much fun with no technology, out in the woods, around a campfire, whatever, with just people and redwood trees. And that is a huge win in and of itself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and I think then it becomes taking that outside of that, right? And generalizing that, right? Of like, what are the things in that experience, right? In your day to day that you can bring with you? Because I completely agree. It's, and that's the really, I don't want to say disheartening thing, but to me, it's like, I remember life before phones.
Right.
And I know that for a lot of these kids, they don't, and so it's really, with what you're doing as well, it's that creativity and like working extra hard of, hey, what is this like, right? Because I think the very cliche common image that we all have is, it's a slumber party and everyone has their phone.
Right.
Right? They're just sitting together on their device.
Totally.
And it's really breaking out of those norms and habits.
Yeah. It's kind of like, for me, it's like, you go to the gym the first time, or you have that like amazing yoga session for the first time, and like you're sweating, you walk out and you just like feel so good. It's like, until you experience that, you never really know like how good it feels. And so like I put out like a question on social media the other day. I was like, when was it, like, have you ever gone 24 hours? Like, when was the last time you went 24 hours without your device? And some people said like, oh, I do it all the time. Some people like didn't even reply, but like, until you really do it, you don't really know how good it feels. And most kids or teens of today are growing up in a world absent of that experience, and it's so powerful. And I guess for you, Dr. Goali, it's like, how do you, because you're not able to like take every kid out, and do an offline retreat. So like you were saying, like, how do you incorporate those like, how do you bring the campfire or bring camping experience? How do you incorporate it into daily life? Like, that's the trick.
So a big part of it is you've got to have the family or the friend. You got to have a support network, right? Because that is really what's going to set you up for success or failure. The worst thing is mom's on her iPad drinking coffee in the morning when kid has been banned from their device. What are you learning, right? So I kind of talk about, it's got to be the whole family. It's got to be letting your friends know in advance. So, I came up with a workbook on, social media and teens and sort of helping them to get off of it. And it's very much a step by step, right? Because you don't just pull the plug. It's, okay, I'm going to go off of some things. I'm going to let my friends know. Because, a lot of times in my office, it's kind of all the barriers that get brought up, but my friends are going to worry. My friends need me. Samantha went through a breakup and I have to be there for her, or I need my phone for my alarm. And so you got to be ready for all of those reasons why, and to kind of be able to, again, you're not trying to combat them or fight them, but just what are alternatives? Well, what about if we get an old fashioned, alarm clock? Or what if you tell Samantha that you can't be there for her? And so I would say that's a big part of it.
So is it kind of like, do you find power in just helping kids develop just like a personal practice for them? Is that typically the process that you go down? And how do you roll that out? And how have you seen that work, I suppose?
Well, and I will say that I think a lot of it is their readiness to change also, right? Because I could have a strong feeling, their parents could have a strong feeling, but if they're like, no, because I have people right now in my case where we're still in the trenches, right? Of this is triggering to you. Every time you're on it, you have a complete meltdown, right? And so, kind of going back to your earlier point, I think that's where, to me, again, I love the idea of like, if you're gone camping with your family, if you're gone on vacation, that is the time, right? Like, that's the time, like, you don't a lot of times have cell reception anyway. Let's put everything away. I can't tell you how many stories, and it's heartbreaking to hear, but of kids, they go away finally on spring break, right? They've been telling me about spring break all, since Christmas, right? They're like, oh my gosh, spring break, they have their phone. And what happens, they're like on a beautiful beach. They've got everything's like the perfect setup, and they get a nasty message. And inside they just crumble, and obviously you're not going to blame them and say, well, this is your fault for bringing your device. But at the same time, it takes family and support of saying, hey, you know what? You can post about your amazing beach vacation when you get home. It doesn't have to be right now, because again, we don't control other people. We don't control when we're going to get triggered. But if we know the mechanism by which we get triggered, we can be very intentional, right? So like one of the baseline things that I always talk about is before bed. Got to put the devices away before bed. Because to me, that's when I see the most spiraling happening. So a lot of times, excuse me, especially for teens, they're tired, they're burnt out, they're more vulnerable. And it just kind of escalates, and a lot of times we've kind of had this conversation. If you had just turned off your phone at 10 o'clock, at 3 a.m., you wouldn't be in tears over XYZ that happened, right? And so that's part of the problem too is, again, when you're not sleeping because of your devices, your ability just to be able to cope with day-to-day things is going to be taxed and compromised. And I'm always telling teens, your ability is already compromised by virtue of being a high schooler or a middle schooler, right? Like you already have a million things on your plate. Now add this interpersonal drama, and it's enough for anyone to break.
Totally. So we've talked a lot about the phone, and obviously it's important because it's on us all the time. It's a super powerful computer. I mean, I heard like a quote recently. It was like, a 13-year-old girl in Somalia living in a hut has more information at her fingertips than Bill Clinton did during his presidency at any given moment. They have a world of possibilities. But what about video games? And I ask because I work with a lot of boys, and not just video games on your phone, but it's, the video game consoles. Yeah. And I think video games, when used in moderation, can be a good release. It's no different than, it's maybe a little bit different, but it's no different than watching TV at times. Yeah. How do you help or empower kids to become more self-aware with video game usage? How is that different to you?
Absolutely. Well, and I think with video games, I think all of it, right? So I think, trying to remember if it was Facebook or Instagram, but they came out, the people like behind the technology, the feed that never goes away, right? How that was like a whole like mind game they played on people. I was like, you can keep scrolling and like never get to the bottom.
Yeah, the endless scrolling and the no stopping cues and
exactly. Yeah. And I feel like, and it's horrible, but there are psychologists, right, employed, not in the most ethical of ways, I would say,
right,
who know how to make things addictive, right? Who know how to get you in the zone and to not stop playing, right? And, we both probably heard these stories of people who, especially the ones where you have like in-app purchases and things like that, how you can game and just have, $100,000 in charges, right? That comes
crazy.
Because I think that there is an addictive mechanism and they play into that. So I think absolutely that is something that, my recommendation really would have to be like, you've got to find ways to get that need. Because I think gaming and playing is wonderful. And there's a whole, science to how we become less creative because we have less unstructured playtime. Like that's the whole thing that scientists are talking about is like we become less creative. We don't have, the Mozarts and the Beethovens and the Da Vincis that we used to. Because we are so structured, and even our game time is structured. It was developed, it was a world developed by somebody else and not of our own making. And so I think, while on the one hand, it can be great for stretching our minds and kind of getting us to learn certain skills, you got to be really careful, and I know there's a lot, especially in the media, every time there's a school shooting, right? They get back to the whole violent video games. And, there's constantly, psychologists on both sides and, well, research shows this or that. And I feel like there's research to show anything, honestly, right? Like you can find the research to prove kind of what your point is. And so I've seen both sides of it. And at the end of the day, I think it is being able to set a timer, take a step back, do whatever it is. And so again, I wouldn't say you have to stop all gaming, but even with that, it's figuring out what's addictive about it, what types of games, when is it that you have a hard time stepping away. I think whenever I've worked with kind of young males who do kind of have that tendency, it's also being mindful of social relationships that develop. And so again, I haven't had a ton of gamers, but I do remember, I had a client who was talking about like gaming with people across the country and world, like that they like form teams and can form friendships and things like that. And I had, one client who actually was friends with somebody from a gaming platform that then disappeared, and they were worried, like, are they suicidal? Like, it brought up a whole, ball of wax that, again, back in my day of Nintendo, like that was not a thing, right? So it's also realizing that gaming, and I think that's the part that can be tough to kind of wrap your head around, is that there is almost like its own kind of social media, right? It's like it's its own network. And so to me, it's also, let's make sure we're actually making friends and practicing social skills beyond our consoles. Because that's also something that, I've talked to people and it's like, well, do you have, tell me about your social group. And they've never met their friends, right? To them, their friends are the people they game with. And as we know from, these stories of, catfishing and what have you, I mean, there could be a child predator for all we know. We don't know if they are who they say they are. And so there's definitely hazards inherent in that as well. And again, I so appreciate you bringing that up, because I feel like gaming is one of those that kind of gets swept under the rug that not as many people talk about, and kind of what can go on. Because again, I think especially, it can be a subset of folks who do that. And so it doesn't quite get the press and attention of, hey, how do you keep kids safe in those contexts?
Yeah. So if I'm a parent, and I ask this because like I have for instance, like I have a 2-year-old, he's cute as ever. And, we're pretty screen free. We allow him to watch one 30-minute educational show per day. He's never touched. I mean, he's obviously like picked up my phone, but he just doesn't know that it's a device for play. He hasn't figured it out. And I feel like it's one of those things that like, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Once he picks it up, it's like, oh, this is a gaming device. It's like, he's constantly going to be itching for it because he sees us on it. We're not perfect. But and so like this last weekend we're with family, and he's hanging out with like, there was like a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old, and they're on their iPads just like a lot of kids are. It's not, like everything in moderation, but it started to get me to think about like, oh man, like what's going to happen when Jax gets a little older and he's with another, like a friend of mine or a family friend that their kids are on devices. And it's like, you don't want to be that person who's like, hey, Bob, like, come on, like your kid, like my kid is, screen free. So like, how do you moderate that? Like, how do you work through that when everybody else is on screens, but you don't want your kid to be on it as much, or you don't want your kid to be video gaming, but he's going to be going over to little George's house and playing Fortnite.
You don't have friends.
Yeah.
That's the answer. Just kidding.
Yeah, seriously. No hanging out. You sit in your room and you look at the wall.
Exactly. Yeah. No more barbecues, no more events.
Right.
And I will say though, and this is what's so promising, is I feel like, we're hopeful too, for that next generation, that because there's this awareness, is people I feel like are starting to pull back. And again, these conversations like you and I are having are becoming much more prevalent. So there was a whole New York Times series of articles actually that my husband found for me, and he's like, oh my gosh, this is kind of trending, and Drew came across it. It was about the Silicon Valley nannies. I don't know if you read, but it was the idea of like, they're supposed to be like device police.
Yeah.
And so it was this whole joke because they were saying like the moms are spying on their nannies on phones, and they're like, well, then why do they need nannies if they have time to spy on the nanny? Right. And so they're talking about how now there's this weird, almost socioeconomic reversal, right? Of like the financial elite, a lot of, Silicon Valley, the people who are doing the tech, they are not allowing it. And it's interesting to hear like right out of Silicon Valley, like, how is this possible? That like, this is like the tech hub and they're saying no to tech. And so I feel like there are more movements at large which help. And so having that conversation is not an impossible thing to have, but I would say these are the conversations that I see. So if you fast forward, and again, hopefully this is not the case, but I've had parents, for example, in very kind of elite areas where recreational drug use is widespread, and there are parents who turn a blind eye. And I have had the parents in my office who are like, all the parents are supplying the drugs, they know about the drugs, and they aren't doing anything. And I'm calling the moms and the dads, and we raised our kids together, and they're in shock, right? They're like, I don't want you going to so-and-so's house if I know that they allow that. So in a very weird way, this is a microcosm, right? And again, of course, not that level, thankfully, of drugs and alcohol and all of that later on comes up. But it's the same principle, right? Of having that conversation of, A, are you comfortable with it as a parent? And B, then what are those boundaries that you set, right? How are those conversations happening with your kids, right? So like I remember my parents, they got us a Nintendo. I'll be the first to admit, I would get like really into it. Like I would get like anxiety. Like my mom's like, you would get anxiety on your like Nintendo set. So I was the one where instead of doing this, I was doing this and this, right? Trying to like jump with the characters and all of that. And, she recognized as a parent, like, hey, this is giving you anxiety. Maybe you shouldn't play. And I was like, okay, I wasn't like addicted to it at that point. It was pretty early on, but it was like, hey, we're trying it. We're seeing you can't handle it and it's going away. You're moving back to your Barbie dolls. And that was okay, And so I think it very much is a monitoring each child, their tendency, because I agree, it's not a bad thing. Like if you're on I've always thought about like if you're on an airplane ride and they will watch their cartoons and not cry, great. Like that's not a bad thing. But if that becomes the babysitter each and every time and it's an easy go-to, to me, that's when it can become problematic.
Yeah, I think about it that it's a lot easier to nip it in the butt early or just to never start than to fix it later. And so that's why, me as a millennial, with I don't even know what not Gen Z, because it's another generation. How can I inspire my friends or, people my age to nip things in the butt now, not raise another generation of tech attached kids. And obviously they're going to get to it in their own time, but the longer that we can delay it, the better.
Well, and I will say that is where, so like, I've had a lot of the struggles that I've had with my teens right now is a lot of these private schools give them an iPad. The textbook
so tough,
is preloaded on a device. And so they say, I'm studying. They still have the app for Snapchat. So, and that's something that, I think now being aware, it makes me think, okay, like as a parent, what am I going to want for my kids, right? Like, not to say that I'm going to, change their entire schooling, but hey, I would be the first to start advocating for like, you need an actual textbook option. I don't want my kid on a screen because like you said, I think it's Generation Alpha. I want to say it's after Z because I remember looking it up of like, what comes after Z?
Yeah, I think they're still defining it. We'll see, but yes, that makes sense. Z then goes back to Alpha.
Exactly.
Right.
So we'll call them that for now. But I think with that group, it is going to be, because we're seeing it now, because I think, again, the parents that I have now, they never saw the textbooks being uploaded and an iPad. Like it happened before they had a chance, right? Whereas with us as millennials, we're seeing it happen. Our kids will be young enough and then we can start kind of having these conversations at schools and districts and sort of being like, okay, is this really the best? I mean, I know I actually had an interview a month or two back. It was kind of an informational interview with a company that's doing like an eye fatigue thing because of all the screen time.
Yeah, eye strain,
Yeah, it was, I'm trying to remember what it was, but it was basically a device to help with that, right? And so you're seeing though, like the whole text neck is a thing.
Oh yeah.
The wrist strain, the tendonitis. So there are like, I think across all the different domains, issues that are coming up, right? So when I was doing research for my millennial toolbox that's coming out, they were talking about how accidents of walking while texting, like walking accidents are up for the first time since like 1984 because of walking and texting, right? So that's not an issue that we would expect to happen at all. And so again, texting and driving, and as all of these things are happening, I think we're seeing policies, we're seeing changes, the whole conversation about dumb phones is one that I have all the time and that they're becoming more and more accessible. So, with parents, again, we'll say, okay, get rid of, the smartphone. They have the phone for emergencies if they need it. I think a lot of millennials themselves are moving, and my husband has talked about it. He's like, I don't need, I don't want anyone texting me. I don't need to take photos. I don't need any of it, All I need is a phone for emergencies. And so, again, I would not be surprised if we, again, as a generation, future generations, start to really compartmentalize. Because like we're saying, again, it's not that this is all bad. It's, an iPad has a time and a place. But that doesn't mean that the iPad now is everywhere that we go. And, you know, same for whether it's a laptop or a desktop or a phone, I think that we very much can sort of assign things to certain categories, right? And so with children, I mean, I think that they talk about how they're so savvy now, right? With the different games and the way that their brain is, you know, being molded. I went to a training recently and, you know, the psychologist was really interesting. And he said, you know, people say it's controversial, but when TV came out, they said, TV is rotting kids' brains. TV, you know, keep them away from TV. And, you know, we ended up being fine. And so with the technology, his point was, are we, you know, over exaggerating it? You know, and if we keep our kids, you know, he had a really interesting theory. He said, you know, if this is kind of changing the wiring of our brain and you deprive your child, are they going to be behind? Right? So if it's expected that everybody knows certain things and now your kid is not developing the skills in a world that is requiring technology, then what does that mean? And so that's, I think, a very interesting question.
Yeah, it's interesting. You brought up the point about the tech CEOs and tech executives. I think about, like, you know, Steve Jobs, for instance, he didn't allow his kids to use an iPad. He had his kids in tech-free schools. There's a lot of kids in Montessori schools and Waldorf schools, and they are tech-free. I do believe that they begin to integrate technology and start to teach them about it come 10, 11, 12 years old.
Interesting.
I believe so. But I think, and then there, some of the Asian countries, they're a little bit ahead of us too. Like it's all play-based learning until about 10 years old. I was watching a documentary on it just recently. But yeah, you're right. It's like in a world where it's all technology and that's where it's going. Like we're still trying to figure out how to walk that tightrope of like, what is the right amount? When is the right time to give it to them?
Well, and absolutely. I mean, I remember, so when I was doing a lot of research on kind of, you know, tech and millennials, because right there's this whole idea of the digital native versus the digital immigrant. And I feel like millennials, I've heard, are kind of on that cusp, right? Like I've heard them defined both ways, depending on sort of how you're viewing it. But again, I think that's one of those things that we're becoming more and more aware of is, you know, that Time Magazine article that came out, I want to say in 2013, it was about like generation media, and that was the first to kind of say, oh, millennials are narcissists, this, that, and the other. However, a really interesting point in that article was talking about how these jobs like digital content creator did not exist, right?
Right.
So what millennial in 1980 or 90, whatever, was going to be like, I'm going to be a digital content director one day. And so, you know, that's part of the adapting with the times, you know, and people talk about there's a lot of good jobs and benefits and whatever to be made in the tech sector. So again, like you said, it's that you don't want to be completely oblivious to it because, you know, I see as a therapist, it's amazing that I can now do therapy virtually, right? And we talk in our field about, you know, accessing rural populations, you know, people who don't have transportation, or if you've got a mom with 3 young kids, she doesn't have to pay for babysitting. You know, the tech is just allowing a whole new world of options. You know, I was reading an article yesterday about how it's helping with stroke care, because with stroke, you literally have minutes to kind of assess what's going on. And, you know, I think like 75% of clinics are now integrating telehealth. And so again, it's so important to be aware, integrating, be, you know, on the cutting edge. But like we're saying with children, you know, there is that fine line, right? So we want them to be creative and learn and do all these things, and like slowly introduce them to something that could be a poison, right?
Right.
Or this blessing in a way, depending. And so it's very tricky.
Yeah, it's like, you know, you think about like kids who grew up and they never had a sip of alcohol, and then they go to college and they just go crazy. And it's like, how do you start integrating it into their lives and allow them to learn how to self-manage and self-moderate, so that when you do send them to college, they just don't go crazy. And we're just a little bit behind right now. Like, it's just taking time, I feel, for these conversations. Like, who's guiding the mass majority of kids right now? It's certainly not public schools. There's a lot of, you know, people like yourself. There's Common Sense Media. There's the Center for Humane Tech. There's a lot of things, even my program, like starting to pop up, and that's great. But like, when's the government going to get involved? When is Apple or Facebook and or Instagram going to say, all right, well, you're this age. Okay, before you download it, you actually got to do this training or something like this technology mindfulness training. Like, I'd love to get it to that point. I think that's when we start to get everybody involved, parents, teachers, coaches, the government, big tech companies. That's when we're really going to start to make a difference. Kind of like, with cigarettes, for instance, like no one knew it was bad. And then I remember in California, like when cigarettes were banned from smoking indoors, like that's when it changed, like when the government got involved. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because that is something that I'm trying to think how I came across it. There's a news story about how public schools have kind of gone a very low-tech route of getting rid of the tech. It's called the Yonder Pouch.
Yonder pouches. Yeah. It's funny. I live in San Mateo. San Mateo High School right around the corner was the first one to implement the Yonder pouch. I was like, that's cool. I got to hit them up. Yeah.
Well, exactly. The idea that, like you said, because we're so behind and the schools are seeing kids are, not getting stuff done that they need to get done. I mean, I remember I grew up in Southern California before there was the option of the school uniforms. So there was a lot back then around, different differences in kids being made fun of, financial resources, and they're like, make it even, right? Give everybody the option. You can go to Target or Walmart or wherever you have to go, make it affordable. And that's one less thing, right? And research time and time again will show uniforms decreases behavioral problems, increases academic performance, right? That's one that to me still blows my mind of like, why don't we all
That's crazy. I hadn't heard that one before. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, that's one of those where it's like, there is really no literature saying that like freedom of clothing expression leads to all these great things. It doesn't,
Right.
But, it's one of those things that it becomes incumbent upon the schools themselves and the districts themselves, unfortunately, to really kind of say, hey, this is a problem. Let's get the Yonder pouch, because we're seeing that our school, these are issues. I mean, one of the things that I've learned, again, so much about from my clients is the whole juuling situation, right? The juuling
huge epidemic, totally.
And I actually have had them in my office where they will show me their device, and a lot of it literally looks like a USB stick. How would you know as a parent?
I know.
I would not, I like to think I'm tech savvy. I would not immediately be like, oh, that's a Juul. No way. And now the schools, I think they're like not allowing people to use the bathrooms. There's like Juul detectors.
Kids are being running around in diapers now.
Pretty soon, right?
Yeah.
But I remember kids being like, yeah, they close off the bathrooms during certain times because kids would go Juul in the bathroom. And so like you said, I wish it was that we had these bigger policies kind of coming in and saying, the way that, I think when we were kids, they had the whole Camel. They said that Camel was advertising to kids because it was very comic-based looking. So they're making cigarettes cool. So they got rid of that. They made it illegal somehow, and we no longer saw the Camel guy marketing to kids. But now, again, you have the Juuls and you have all that. I want to say that there was some legislation recently passed around that as well. Because I think it was the flavor cartridges was making it very appealing. Like if you're like, oh, pina colada flavor or orange creamsicle, right? That sounds really good to kids. So I want to say that they got maybe rid of that. Again, I'm not positive. But again, it's just these things keep morphing so quickly, and it's, becoming a one-by-one, schools, parents trying to advocate and make things happen faster than the nationwide policies.
What can parents do right about now? The kids, they get their Chromebooks or they get their iPads, and they say the schools say, oh, there's blocks on them from accessing the apps. These kids they know how to get around them instantly. I've talked to them about this. They're like, oh yeah, you exit 12 times in a row and then it just works. And it's like, all right, they could literally they're wizards, right? They can figure it out instantly. So what can a parent do about this? They write letters to the superintendent, just not send them to school, homeschool them. There doesn't seem to be a great solution here.
Yeah. Well,
as far as tech in schools, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that's where at the end of the day, it has to be incumbent on the parents, right? And really doing that monitoring. I remember one very extreme case. I actually had a parent remove the door from the hinges of their daughter's,
oh my God.
Literally the door was on this, I've never heard that before, but I was like, okay, so much for daughter, locking herself up or whatever. I've had, again, extremes of parents saying, you're in the living room when you're doing your homework, right? Granted, some people could say that's extreme, that's controlling or what have you. But again, trust is a big theme that comes up in my therapy office, right? Of like, well, we trusted that you're doing your homework, but you were binging Netflix. Until you restore the trust, we can't trust you to do your homework without being monitored. So I think part of it too is, again, that parenting, right? And it's a hard line because you don't want a helicopter, but it's having the conversations. Like I talk about, to me, one of the scary things is the whole like Netflix binge, because they're just getting so much input, stories and moral values, just things that they're just intaking without being questioned. Like I remember, we were watching Gilmore Girls with my parents, right? And they make little jabs about like, well, why is the Jess character all moody? Like that's not a good male character. And I was like, you guys, not here for your commentary. Like this is not what I'm looking for. But they knew what I was watching, right? And they could kind of, in their own loving way, although at the time it felt a little much, be like, what are these messages that they're giving? And I think when kids are privately viewing these films and messages, there's no other kind of voice of reason. And so that's where, to me, it is kind of really being aware of what are they seeing and having conversations actively with them about what they're seeing.
Slightly off topic. I just want to tell you this funny little, it wasn't like, it's just like a thought, like back in the day when you used to get in the trouble, like your parents would lock you in your room, and nowadays it's like you get in trouble and it's like parents will throw you outside, like go play. That's getting in trouble nowadays because kids are just not spending the time outside like they used to. It's like they don't know how to just play in an unstructured setting. They're so used to the game setting up their play.
Well, and I think also, and this is where, as I've been reading kind of about, tech and detoxing, so there's actually a really great book called Off, or The Power of Off, I want to say. And it's a therapist, I think, in New York, and she talks a lot about kind of tech and the adults she's working with. And just some really interesting things. So she talks about, how parents feel like they have to be tethered to their phone if their child text messages, because otherwise they're bad parents. And so whereas in the past, like you call in case of an emergency, you are on call 24/7. And think about your fight and flight response. You're always, ready, geared up. Yep. I was reading in another book and they were talking about how with the advent of just email, anyone can contact you, right? So back in the day, if the Gap wanted to spam you, right? Right now you buy one item for the rest of your life. You're like stuck on their listserv and you can't get off no matter how many times you unsubscribe.
No, you'll unsubscribe. They're going to add you back like a year later. Oh, they'll serve you, you might not get an email, but you're going to get, you're going to get a Google search, ad or something like that. You're just stuck. Yeah.
So, but now I think what they're talking about though is like, we are so inundated by emails and listservs, and any Joe Schmo with an email address can contact you. Like there's no barrier to entry. The way that in the past, you needed a stamp, right? You needed to pay your however many cents the stamp was to contact that person. And so now with that gone, a lot of parents, right, are inundated. Like I'll have people say, oh yeah, I have, 100 unread messages in my inbox. To me, that's like shock, because I'm the kind of person who like, I have an inbox of like maybe 10 unread messages. Like I'm on my email. But I know a lot of people who, if they're at a company where they're just getting dozens a day, they're drowning. And so my point is that directly impacts the parenting, right? Because parents are more busy than they've ever been before because of this 24-hour workday now, because your boss can call you, your boss can say, take this photo, again, things happen very fast. In the past, a project that might have taken a week or two, now you personally can be the videographer, you personally can be the recorder, you can make the website, you can do the blog, you can do it all. And so the amount of just work is astronomical, right? Yeah. And in a way, you never get on top of it. And so it's natural that then as a parent, you would say, okay, kids, please take out your iPads because I'm exhausted and I don't really have any energy left. And I think that's kind of the bigger, to me, sad thing about this whole thing.
It's really interesting that you say that, Dr. Goali, because I think sometimes when I'm trying to inspire parents to get offline or help their kids get offline, I kind of feel like they want to go see the documentary, right? They want to go to the events and they want to read the book, but like deep down at their core, subconsciously, they're like, it's just easier when their kids are on devices.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of sad. And that's why it's like, you know, I actually have some, you know, loose friends now that 3 years old, their kid needs the phone in front of them while eating already. And it's like, it's sad. And like, they know that I do this work and like, they feel like I'm judging them and like, I'm trying not to, but it's like, I really want to help, but I don't want to like project myself into their lives. So it's just a complex, sophisticated issues that we're dealing with.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So anyways, this has been really fun. Let's think. I'm trying to like, let's end with a bang. So like, what's like, maybe what's like one thing as a parent that we could do if we're a parent of a teen? I mean, it's really hard to say one thing because it's very dependent on like, you know, what your kid or your family needs. But maybe what's something that's new or something that you've been seeing that really has been working lately as far as helping develop a healthier relationship with technology?
Yeah. You know, I think it is kind of that old-fashioned advice, right? Of spend time with your children, connecting face-to-face, right? I have a mother-daughter right now. You know, they're doing a mother-daughter AAA. And I get that everyone obviously has different finances or whatever, but it doesn't have to be big, right? Like, go on a coffee date with your child and get to know their inner world.
Right.
Because that is going to be the greatest gift. That's going to get them to open up. And they feel like you're completely invested and you have time. And, you know, I remember as a kid, for me, it was trips to the mall with my mom and on the drive, right? That's when I would kind of talk about, you know, school and, well, this thing is bothering me and that's going on. It's just the time, you know, and that's the most precious resource we have. And so that's where, to me, it's about also parents, like I said, being hyper vigilant of their technology. And not letting them bleed into their personal life the best that they can. Right. Because this is a message that we're hearing everywhere. I mean, we've gone to church services and the pastor is talking about phones. And people in the congregation, you know, being concerned about, you know, the phone, their time with their family or texting other people and not being present. And so I feel like this is something that's impacting all of us, right? But at the end of the day, it's a matter of being able to take that time back, right? And reinvesting it in the most critical and precious thing that we have, which is our families.
Right. Yeah. It really comes down to the parents. Like the parents really need to model it and just love your kids and talk to them and, you know, not be the hypocrite, right? Like let's come to an agreement where we can all unplug together for, you know, something that works for us. Not, you don't need to throw the phones away. Like, how can we all get on the same page and develop a stronger relationship with tech and a stronger relationship with each other? And that's what it's all about. Yeah. So cool. So Dr. Goali, where can people learn more about you and all the incredible work that you've done and that you're doing?
So I do actually have a website. So I am up to date on that. So www.drgoali.com, Goali. So,
cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. And we'll link it in the show notes and all in the description and all that. Thank you so much for your time today. You're doing incredible work. You speak about this with such confidence and such poise, and it's just so clear. And you got great energy, and I just really enjoyed having you on today.
It was wonderful being on, so thank you.
Thank you. And make sure to stay on right after this, okay? Thanks, Dr. Goali. Take care.
You too.
If you enjoy the show, please make sure to subscribe and give us a rating and review on iTunes. You can also connect with us at americaoffline.info for more great content and to register for upcoming events. Thanks for listening. Now it's time to get offline.